Irish Heritage Month, and we're lucky to be recording today from the new and rather temporary Irish Heritage Center. Well, you probably know my name by the title of the podcast. Suffice to say, by way of an introduction, that I'm happily married and a reasonably devout Irish Catholic. Our son was an Eagle Scout, and our daughter despises Donald Trump, along with anybody who's ever supported him. And I'm almost 70 years old, the age of obsolescence, or so it often seems. Nobody listens to me anymore. Our daughter sometimes acts like I'm on the edge of senility, and our grandchildren, while tolerantly respectful, seem to find my ideas quaint. So I was pretty surprised when Pat Munsey asked me to talk to you. Who, I wondered, would possibly care about anything I have to say? But I've been told that they, the producers of this podcast, for some reason trust me to talk about anything I want, anything that interests me. And that's an attractive idea, by the way. Maybe we can get to that stuff later on. But as for today, I believe the best and maybe the only service I can offer is to explain and defend the beliefs, the standards of morality that have been common to people throughout history. The basic fundamentals of character which only become apparent through experience. My years, almost 7 decades of them, force a certain degree of wisdom on a person. It's almost unavoidable. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share a little bit about what I've learned. I got more than one reason for doing this. In the first place, as Nikki Haley has suggested, the world's on fire. I think she's right about that, although I'm not nearly as alarmed as the conservative talk radio hosts who open every segment like they've just run out of a burning house. We've seen this show before. Dictatorial rulers, war, starvation, and slavery, to recall just a few of our missteps repeated over and over throughout the entire history of the world. While the media tries to terrify everybody with the news of what we're doing to each other, we keep right on doing it throughout our history. It doesn't make a lot of sense, of course. We're living in an enlightened age. We're better educated and certainly more sophisticated than our parents, who never really got it. Whatever it's supposed to be. I frankly have forgotten by now. How is it that with all the tremendous strides we've made in science and technology, with all our compassion for the gender confused and our humane treatment of unwanted pets, people are still raped, women and children are treated like objects, and families fall apart? How is it that in a booming international trade we use our newfound technology and wealth not to feed and clothe the poor, but to develop bigger and better weapons so we can kill each other? One has to look no further than school shootings in America to see how close we are to the gutter. In the days of my youth, it was unthinkable that anybody would walk into a school with a gun and murder children. Sure, kids were bullied, others were ignored. Occasionally a fist fight broke out on the playground or after a football game. But nobody ever considered mass murder. For some reason, things have changed. Let me suggest a possibility. Before the days of school shootings, 70% of Americans claimed some religious affiliation. The number today hovers around 48%. Before the days of schoolyard slaughter, nearly every child was born into a family which included a mother and a father. These days, 4 out of 10 kids are born to single mothers, and nearly a quarter of all children under 18 live in single-parent households. I'm seeing a pattern. The moral lessons, which have been passed down from the pulpits of our churches to the kitchen table to our children, clearly are not being taught anymore. All our sophistication, our tolerance, our overturning the family's kitchen table has done very little to make America or anywhere else great again. In addition to the internet and bariatric surgery, our advances in science brought us global positioning satellites, GPS, a more efficient way to get wherever it was you wanted to go. It's a great convenience. Drivers started getting lost as soon as the automobile was invented. If you wanted to go someplace before GPS, you'd have to follow directions, look for signs and landmarks as to where to turn and how far to go. In those days, it was possible to find yourself hopelessly off course. And when that happens, when you figure out you're going the wrong way, the only possible course of action isn't to keep going in the same direction and hope that eventually you might arrive at some place you want to be. No, the only sensible thing to do is to turn around and go back to where you started. The world's on fire because for thousands of years we human beings have continued along a dark desert highway with a cool wind in our hair and grooving to the eagles as we travel recklessly toward a fiery disaster of twisted metal and broken glass, the end of the road. All because we're too stubborn, too sophisticated, too cultured to look back. All because we've evolved beyond one simple idea that told us exactly how to go. In everything. Treat people the same way you want them to treat you. The golden rule is the principle of treating others as one would want to be treated. It's sometimes called an ethics of reciprocity, meaning that you treat someone the way you'd like to be treated and not how they treat you. Various expressions of this rule can be found in the tenets of most religions and creeds throughout the ages. I think it was my mom who first introduced the concept to me, probably in the late 1950s. I'm not sure where she heard it, but I know who said it first, and it was a long time before my mom shared it. Consider what our world would look like if we'd been practicing this simple principle for the last couple thousand years. What would our community look like if every government leader, every merchant, and every father treated everybody else the way he expects to be treated? Here's a great example that recently made the real news. Gary Pilnick, who earns $4 million a year as the CEO of Kelley Corporation, suggested that families fight the high cost of groceries, up 26% in the last 3 years, by the way, that we can all get by if we just started feeding our families cereal for dinner. Now, I don't even know how a seemingly sane and extremely rich person could expect to get away with making such a statement. It reminds me of the great hunger of Ireland when the English fed the Catholics potatoes while exporting beef and vegetables off the island and getting rich. I'll bet Gary Pilnick isn't feeding his kids cereal for dinner. Kellogg's average price of a box of cereal was up 17% at the end of 2023, according to data compiled by the Star Tribune. Kellogg's profits were up a whopping 540% in 2030. But we should be eating Frosted Flakes for dinner. Do unto others. The world's on fire because for thousands of years human beings have been trying to make peace with war, the problem of troubled families with divorce, the problem of gun violence with more guns, the problem of greed with rewards of riches. And apparently at the very same time, people throughout America have shoved a roadmap into the glove compartment along with a pair of broken sunglasses and a 2-year-old receipt from Rural King. Clearly we've lost our way. For most of my life, I tried to abide with the lessons I'd learned in Sunday school at the First Presbyterian Church. The principles of character I learned in the Boy Scouts, and the example that was shown me by responsible adults like my parents. I credited my compassion back to my Irish-American heritage, which provided me with a clear sense of justice, but not so much the teachings of Jesus Christ. I was too smart, too confident, and too strong to share any credit for anything worthwhile that I might do. until I finally had to admit that there is indeed a God and that he would really appreciate it if we'd be a little nicer to each other. So why do you suppose people think we can make progress without faith? Well, for one thing, understanding a religion is hard work. The questions which separate people from God often involve matters of deep theology or religious history. If you've ever tried to read the Old Testament, you probably know what I'm talking about. Too often the unchurched curious will engage in some self-study, get frustrated or bored, and take up a hobby instead. Unchurched. It almost sounds dirty, doesn't it? I hope I haven't turned anybody off. If you're offended, though, I completely understand. I used to feel a hair rise on the back of my neck anytime somebody mentioned church. It almost made me angry, and I never understood why. Some years ago, I knew this guy who took up fishing, and he went in whole hog. He had a big tackle box full of colorful lures, a rod for every occasion. Eventually, he bought a boat that was the envy of every angler in the Midwest. Fishing was all he ever talked about. Where he was fishing and what kind of bait he was using. I think he did more talking about fishing than he actually spent on the water. My point is that he seemed obsessed with a hobby which was of very little interest to me. He became annoying because I haven't been fishing since 1974. The humorist Dave Barry made once this comparison. Hobbies, he wrote, of any kind are boring except to people who have the same hobby. This is also true of religion, although you won't find me saying so in print. I'm ignorant about the joys of fishing in the same way that the unchurched are ignorant about the love of Jesus Christ. Nobody should take it personal. You don't know what you don't want to know. So it's likely that if I pick up a fishing pole and throw a line into the wildcat, I'd be very lucky to catch anything. If I pick up a Bible and try to interpret ancient scriptures, I'll probably not catch on either. Even the most devout people and scholars of the first century Jews questioned the meaning of some of Christ's teachings. But fortunately, that's what experts are for. And the best place to find an expert is in a local church. But I suggest looking for the man or woman on their knees and not the guy on television wearing a $3,000 sport jacket. Here's another reason many people give little thought to God. Various religions, and even different denominations of the same religion, sometimes disagree. The controversy is confusing. As long as we argue about abortion or homosexuality or dancing, we're missing the whole point of doing unto others. And while I understand that any faith must stay true to their doctrine, these controversies don't do anything to draw people into a closer relationship with God. Most Christians, for example, recognize the significance of Jesus' mom. But no controversy has to be handled more delicately than the important role of the Blessed Mother. Irish Catholic beliefs on the subject are so passionately held that they defend her honor with the same sense of chivalry they feel for their own dear mothers. Protestants may look at it as idolatry. And here's another thing. People become disenchanted with religion because the lines have been blurred by a society which seems reluctant to hold anybody accountable for much of anything, except religion. We make excuses for illegal immigrants, old politicians, even murderers. But let the Pope say something nice about homosexuals and suddenly everybody loses their minds believing that a 2,000-year-old religion is suddenly illegitimate. Why are we so quick to condemn faith? Well, I think it's a fear of hypocrisy. You see, there's no such thing as a bad Christian, but the world is full of hypocrites. There are Christians and Catholics and policemen and even United States Marines who do bad things. Nobody's perfect. But if we don't consistently try to live within the doctrines of your beliefs, if we don't follow the rules of whatever group we identify with, for whatever reason, we're not who we pretend to be. In the case of Christians, we must either subscribe to the standards of Jesus Christ or not. When someone identifying as a Christian gets caught misbehaving, it's only a matter of time before he's surrounded by a stone-throwing crowd of people shouting, "Hypocrite." Nobody wants to be associated with any group which won't stand up for their beliefs. A good many people shy away from God because the tenets of religion interfere with their lifestyle. They may feel like their impulses to live with gusto will cause them to be harshly judged. They'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints, as Billy Joel suggested in his musical narrative of somebody intent on having sex with a young Catholic girl. If that's your excuse for turning away from God, I want you to know that your impression is absolutely wrong. Folks who have tread on the wild side are exactly the kind of people who would be embraced by any legitimate Christian church. Some of the most credible Christians I know, the most faithful, are people who understand fully their own weaknesses. Probably because we saw an image once in a picture book as children, many people envision God as a bearded old man sitting on his throne up in heaven while he looks down on us. Any time we try to have a little fun, he shakes his head and throws a lightning bolt in our direction. Some of those folks who have a vague belief in God feel like they're always being judged, and we don't want to think about that. The Old Testament of the Bible paints God as a pretty humorless and impatient being. But then, as predicted in the Old Testament, along comes Christ. Through the New Testament, we come to see God not as a cranky old man, but like a warm summer breeze. He drifts gently around each of us every day and in everything we do, not to judge, but to encourage. But first, in order to imagine God in either of these roles, we must subscribe, at least somewhat, to the supernatural. We must have some flicker of faith that allows us to step past our cynicism, our inability to believe in anything we can't see. We have to consider that maybe, just maybe, we're wrong to think that we already know everything there is to know. Because, we're all ignorant. Why does everybody have a different set of fingerprints? How many stars are there? Does Bigfoot really exist? My gosh, did you know that last year 11 new species of creatures were discovered right here, sharing this world with us all along, and we didn't even know about it until last year. We're discovering new things all the time. I'll admit it does seem unlikely that a pair of all the creatures of the world could be rounded up and placed aboard a ship. Basic biology tells us that a woman can't get pregnant without first having what Mary called relations with a man. It's hard to believe that in just 6 days God created everything, all that we see and all that we don't. But are these miracles any more hard to accept than the idea that in the middle of dark space there was once a huge explosion which eventually, over millions of years, resulted in you listening to this podcast? That matter was formed out of nothing? Well, we might as well consider it possible for somebody to walk on the water. So, the quick to find fault unchurched may be thinking right now, if God created man, can you explain the apes, the theory of evolution? My friends, the theory of evolution is even less provable and probable than the theory of intelligent design. That something who knew exactly what they were doing created the heavens and the earth. Scientific theories like evolution and, yes, philosophies of faith are not the same thing as scientific laws. You may have a theory as to why Donald Trump arranged to have sex with a porn star while his third wife was pregnant. But we can't say for sure. Only he knows why he'd do such a thing. We do, however, know that if I push this microphone over to the edge of the table, it's going to fall on the floor. We know that's how it works because most of us have dropped something from time to time, and never once did it just hover in midair. It fell. It always falls. Things falling to the ground can be explained by Newton's scientific law of universal gravitation. He was able to prove the phenomena of gravity on Earth using known astronomical behaviors by watching the stars. The scientific laws of gravity have been confirmed and validated as true. They're not just theory, they're objective scientific facts. On the other hand, the theory of evolution remains a theory, even after more than 150 years when it was first theorized by Charles Darwin. A theory, by definition, is basically a supposition. Like, if I were to say, I suppose Britney Spears shaved her head because she was thinking about joining the Coast Guard. It's little more than an idea or a belief about something arrived at through speculation or conjecture. Conjecture and speculation are highly subjective, as opposed to laws which can be shown to be true and thus can be stated as objective. Again, subjective is speculative, objective is factual. Evolution is something that can't be measured, tested, or repeated, so it can't be established as a fact. And interestingly, evolution isn't all that concerned with the origin of life, something you'd think they'd have a great deal of interest in since that's where evolution began. And finally, I think, there are those who have turned away from God because they've been hurt, and supposedly a loving and caring God didn't do anything to help. We prayed for important things and nothing happened. Nothing very good anyway. Why does God let us suffer if He loves us? Well, I think that's a very good question. But I don't think your grief and disappointment, your anger, should push you away from church, from God. Just the opposite. How do you expect to get any answers to some of life's most important questions if you don't study history and philosophy? If you don't form relationships with other people who are asking the same questions, maybe experiencing the same tragedies? If you don't take the time to sit or kneel quietly, close your eyes, and ask. I hope to come back to some of these topics and discuss them in more detail a little later, but without the benefit of formal training in theology, I'd be way out of my league if I try to explain religion to you. But I think we do need to talk. If you'll stay with me here, I promise not to preach or to start quoting chapter and verse from the Bible. You can get that from a lot of other people who are way more qualified than me. And because I'd like to avoid any controversy, I'm also bound to sidestep any focus on a specific denomination of Christianity. Keep in mind that I understand what you believe and how you intend to live with those beliefs is none of my business. I'm not trying to tell you how you need to live your life. That's for you to decide. Ever since my days in the military, I've been a little resentful of people who make the rules without fully understanding the problems. So I'll try not to judge or talk about temptations I don't have. Lord knows I got plenty of my own. Podcasts like this one and television shows like you find on Sunday morning can't be considered a substitute for having a relationship with Christ. You might think of these programs as a hallway lined with doors which lead to different rooms. If I can get you to follow me down the hall, I've accomplished my task today. But it's the rooms and not the hallway where one finds peace, warmth, and comfort. Things that I think we all need. If you've come this far and followed along with me these last 20 minutes, I hope that you'll at least think about turning a few of those door handles and taking a peek at what's waiting for you inside. But I'll caution you not to stay very long in a room simply because you like the music or they offer free coffee or because the door was ornate. Look instead for a room where you find that the doctrines are true and not just what you want to hear. You might find yourself out in the hall for a long time, just as I have. While waiting, I tried to abide by the rules of the house, but often failed. It was life experience as a Boy Scout, an airman, a husband and a father, and after more than 3 decades of law enforcement, which finally pushed me through one of those doors. And when I got there, I understood why my journey had taken so long. My thanks today to the late C.S. Lewis, writer, speaker, professor of literature at the University of Oxford, and a former atheist, for his assistance in the preparation of this text. See you next time. Peace be with you.